Right now, thousands of airplanes are crossing the skies above our planet. Almost every major city pair you can think of is connected by a non-stop flight, except one. Sydney, the largest city in Australia, and London, one of the busiest capitals in Europe. Two massive, wealthy English-speaking cities, and yet in over 100 years of commercial aviation, nobody has ever operated a scheduled non-stop passenger service between them. Not once. Every single passenger, every single time, has had to land somewhere else first. That's not for lack of trying, it's because geographically, this might be the single hardest route on Earth to fly. Take a globe, spin Australia around to the exact opposite side of the planet, and it lands almost precisely between Europe and the US East Coast, out in the middle of the North Atlantic. Sydney and London are so far apart that if you drilled straight through the Earth from one, you'd come out in the Atlantic Ocean, not anywhere near the other city. For 100 years, that distance won. Every plane that tried to cross it either had to stop or had to fly nearly empty just to make the fuel last. But sometime in October of 2027, that finally changes. And getting here has taken a war, a broken record that stood for 80 years, and a plane that had to be redesigned from the inside out just to survive the trip. If stories like this are your thing, go ahead and hit subscribe now. I promise this one's worth sticking around for.
Rewind to the late 1700s. If you were sailing from Britain to Australia, you weren't just leaving for a while. You were leaving for the better part of a year, sometimes longer. Families said their goodbyes at the docks, knowing full well they might not see each other again for 12 months, and that's if the ship made it. By the mid-1800s, faster clipper ships had cut that down to 2 or 3 months. Steamships and the Suez Canal shaved it further still, down to around a month by the early 1900s. But nobody had ever crossed in under 30 days, not once, until 1919, when two Australian brothers, Ross and Keith Smith, decided to see if a plane could do what a ship never had. They entered a competition called the Great Air Race, flying a converted World War I bomber across roughly 14,000 kilometers of largely unmapped sky. The plan called for 14 stops. It sounded manageable. It wasn't. Bad weather, engine failures, and fuel shortages forced 9 emergency landings they never planned for, bringing the total to 23. Imagine finally settling into your seat, closing your eyes, only to feel the plane descending again for the 23rd time, with still more of the journey left to go. It took them 28 days and 136 hours of actual flying time. But they landed, and for the first time in human history, someone had crossed from one side of the Earth in under a month. That flight didn't just set a record, it changed the question. Until then, people had wondered, can this be done? After 1919, the question became, how much faster can we make it? It planted an idea in the aviation world that would take over 100 years to finish. The idea that this journey could someday take a single day instead of a single month.
16 years later, in 1935, Qantas and the British airline Imperial Airways launched the first ever scheduled service between London and Brisbane. It sounds glamorous until you look closer. 28 scheduled stops. Imagine unpacking your suitcase almost every night, only to pack it again the next morning before the next leg of the journey. 12.5 days of travel, a ticket that would cost you the equivalent of $50,000 today, a price so steep that only the wealthiest people on Earth could even dream of taking it. And this wasn't a flight so much as an expedition with wings. Passengers slept overnight in Baghdad, in Karachi, in Bangkok, switching planes again and again along the way. By 1938, new flying boats, Aircraft that landed on water instead of runways cut that in half, down to 9.5 days. And Sydney's International Airport back then wasn't an airport at all. There was no terminal, no jet bridge, no glass and steel. Passengers walked down a wooden dock at Sydney Harbor, suitcases in hand, and climbed aboard something that looked far more like a boat than a plane. It looked for a moment like the hard part was over. It wasn't.
Then the war came, and almost overnight the route to London vanished. But in 1943, in the middle of that war, Qantas attempted something that still sounds borderline insane today. To keep any connection to Britain alive at all, they rigged up a small fleet of Catalina flying boats and flew the first ever non-stop commercial crossing of the Indian Ocean, Perth to Sri Lanka, over 3,500 nautical miles, with no radio contact, just a compass, the stars, and nerve. They timed their departure deliberately so the plane would cross Japanese-controlled waters under the cover of darkness. The flights lasted between 27 and 33 hours straight, long enough that everyone on board watched 2 separate sunrises before they ever touched down. Think about that for a second. Commercial aviation has existed for more than 100 years now. Airlines have built faster jets, bigger jets, jets that can fly halfway around the world. And in all that time, nobody, not one airline, not once, has spent more continuous hours in the air on a single scheduled commercial flight than that wartime crew did in 1943. That record has survived longer than most airlines have even existed. They called it the Double Sunrise Service. Word of mouth started calling the whole route the kangaroo route almost right away, a nod to all the hops, the stops, the plane had to make to get there. But it wasn't until 1947, when Qantas introduced the new Lockheed Constellation on the route, that kangaroo service became the airline's official marketing name, complete with a hopping kangaroo logo. It's still what people call it today.
After the war, progress sped up fast. New Constellation aircraft, 4 days instead of 12, half the old price. Airlines started racing each other for the route. And then in 1959, everything changed at once. Qantas became the first airline outside the US to fly the Boeing 707, and travel time dropped by 25 hours almost overnight. For the first time in history, crossing half the planet stopped feeling like an expedition. By the late 1980s, it felt like aviation had reached its finish line. One stop between Sydney and London, about 25 hours. Most people assumed that was simply as good as it was ever going to get. They couldn't have been more wrong. It started feeling like travel. It looked, again, like aviation had finally solved this. It hadn't, not even close. The 707 was fast, but it still couldn't carry a full plane the whole way without stopping. That problem, not speed, but range, is what engineers would spend the next 50 years chasing. Quick one before we keep going. If any of this is new to you, drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching from. I genuinely read them, and I love seeing how far this stuff travels.
The Boeing 747 arrived in 1971, and for the first time, engineers weren't just building a faster plane. They were building one that could carry hundreds of passengers and the fuel needed to skip stops altogether. It worked, mostly. The 747 cut the route down to just 2 stops in Singapore and Bahrain, and for everyday Australians, it turned Europe from a once-in-a-lifetime trip into an actual holiday option. By 1988, an updated 747 dropped it to a single stop in Singapore, and there, believe it or not, is roughly where the technology has sat for almost 40 years. There was one strange exception.
In 1989, a Qantas 747-400, the aircraft famously registered VHOJA, actually did fly non-stop from London to Sydney in just over 20 hours. A genuine world record at the time, and technically the first time a commercial airliner had ever crossed that distance without landing. But it was a delivery flight, not a real passenger service. It was the aviation equivalent of winning a marathon by leaving all your luggage behind. The distance had finally been conquered, only under conditions that made the flight commercially useless. No passengers, no cargo. Every ounce of unnecessary weight had been stripped out just to make the fuel stretch far enough. It proved the distance could be flown. It didn't prove anyone could actually fly it, full of passengers, and still make money doing it. For the next 30+ years, nobody tried a real scheduled service again. The dream didn't die, it just went quiet. And the reason becomes even incredible when you realize what a real version of these flights would actually involve. For hours at a time, the aircraft would be crossing some of the most remote airspace on the planet, with the nearest suitable diversion airport still thousands of kilometers away. If something unexpected happened, there would often be no nearby runway, only ocean and some of the most isolated skies on Earth. Which meant solving this challenge wasn't just about building an airplane that could fly farther. It meant building one that could safely operate in one of the most isolated environments commercial aviation has ever attempted.
For over 20 years, the record for the longest non-stop flight on Earth has belonged to Singapore Airlines, flying Singapore to New York, about 18.5 hours, just over 15,000 kilometers. Sydney to London is a different animal entirely, roughly 17,000 kilometers, depending on the exact routing. No commercial aircraft in history had ever been built that could cross that distance non-stop with a real full load of passengers and cargo. So in 2017, Qantas did something almost provocative. They didn't ask Boeing and Airbus to build them a faster plane. They challenged both companies to build them a plane that could survive a distance no commercial aircraft ever had. Both spent 2 years designing competing aircraft. Then COVID hit, and the entire project went silent for 2 years. When it woke back up in 2022, Qantas chose Airbus's answer, a heavily modified A350-1000, torn apart and rebuilt almost entirely around one single goal: range. An extra fuel tank holding 20,000 more liters built directly into the rear of the fuselage. Reinforced structure to handle the added weight at takeoff. And the part that tells you exactly how brutal this trade-off really is: the passenger count was slashed from over 300 down to just 238, purely to shave off weight the plane couldn't afford to carry. With all of it combined, this aircraft, designated the A350-1000ULR, is rated to fly more than 16,000 kilometers non-stop for up to 22 straight hours, just enough and not a minute more to make it from Sydney to London without ever touching the ground. Qantas ordered 12 of them. The original target was late 2025, then a regulatory problem with the redesigned fuel tank pushed it back. Then a supply chain slowdown at Airbus pushed it back. But the project is finally waking up. On June 2nd, 2026, the very first custom-built Project Sunrise aircraft, tail number MSN 707, took off from Toulouse, France for its maiden test flight. It flew for just under 4 hours, climbing above 41,000 feet to put that new fuel system through its paces, kicking off a 2-month certification campaign to make a 22-hour non-stop flight legal to fly with passengers on board. A few weeks later, Qantas rolled the aircraft in full livery and confirmed the date the entire aviation world had been waiting a decade for. The first non-stop Sydney to London service will begin in October 2027.
22 hours in a metal tube sounds like a punishment. That's long enough to watch every Lord of the Rings movie twice over, with time left to spare. It's also long enough for the sun to rise, cross the entire sky, and almost set again before you land. But put it next to where this story started, a journey that once took the better part of a year, then the better part of a month, and 22 hours stops sounding like an ordeal. It starts sounding like a miracle nobody's pretending it's not. Qantas clearly knows the psychology here, because the cabin is built to fight the clock. Just 6 first-class suites up front, each roughly the size of a small studio apartment. 52 business suites with doors that physically close for privacy. 40 premium economy seats and 140 economy seats with a 33-inch pitch, more legroom than most airlines give you on a flight a fraction of the length. There's even a dedicated well-being zone built into the cabin with stretch handles and guided on-screen exercises, just so people can stand up and move for a few minutes somewhere over the middle of an ocean, hours from the nearest runway in either direction. And London isn't even the finish line. Qantas plans to use this exact aircraft to launch the first ever non-stop Sydney to New York route too. A touch shorter, since New York sits closer than London does, but arguably the harder route to fly, thanks to the powerful, unpredictable jet streams over the Pacific. One more small thing, if any part of this made you go, "Wait, really?" Send it to one friend who'd get a kick out of it. That's genuinely most of what keeps a channel like this alive.
In 1919, it took 28 days, 23 unplanned landings, and 4 exhausted men in a converted bomber just to prove this journey was survivable inside a single month. In October 2027, 108 years later, that exact same trip, opposite ends of the Earth, will take passengers about 22 hours and 0 stops. Every non-stop flight you've ever boarded exists because someone, somewhere, refused to accept the limits of the plane before it. And maybe nowhere is that clearer than on this one single route, a trip that once cost people a year of their lives and is about to cost them less than 1 full day. If you want to see where the engineering story goes next, I've got another video queued up in the playlist right on your screen. Go ahead and tap it and hit subscribe while you're there so the next one finds you automatically. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.